weeks. So what I want to talk to you today is a little bit about violence, and end up this lecture talking to you a little bit about the phenomena of genocide, which unfortunately, as you will see, is quite common. And we'll end up talking a little bit about genocide, the sort of common elements you see in genocide, and set the stage for later on when we will talk about some of the unique elements of the Nazi-perpetrated genocide. Okay? And Reiner and I, basically agree that there's a lot of non-unique things about the Nazi era, and then there are some unique things, and the camp system of the Holocaust is one of the very interesting, unique things. But there are also a lot of sort of common elements of genocide that we find in the Nazi genocide as well, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that later on. I want to mention two books. We're going to come back and talk to you about these later on in the semester as well, but I'll mention these two books and the two authors because they kind of make bookends a little bit around the discussion, especially around the discussion of the Holocaust. And this is a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners by Daniel Goldhagen here. Goldhagen, sorry, it's not a clear picture here. Ordinary Germans in the Holocaust. And the other book is Ordinary Men, Reserve Police Battalion 101 and the Final Solution in Poland, written by Christopher Browning. Okay. And these two guys who wrote these books really kind of frame the argument around the Holocaust, with Goldhagen saying that due to historical circumstances, basically that the Germans develop a sort of a character, I don't want to say flaw, but they sort of develop a characteristic of anti-Semitism that becomes eliminationist anti-Semitism, meaning that you have to get rid of these people that you don't like. And on the other side, Browning takes the argument, and he studies this group of these reserve police guys who are called up to follow the soldiers as they go in toward Russia, into the east, and their job is to round up Jews and other people who are seen as antithetical to the Nazi regime, and round them up, take them off into the woods, and shoot them. And these guys are not especially Nazi ideologues. They're just sort of retired policemen, and they're, as Browning calls, ordinary men, and yet here they are doing this sort of horrible thing. And so these frame two sort of arguments, right? Two sort of arguments. One is that there's a unique thing about the Germans in the Nazi period that causes them to become killers of Jews and other people. And Browning's argument, on the other hand, which says, no, in the right circumstances, all people can do bad things. Just have to have the circumstances to be such, and then anybody can become a killer. Or another way of looking at it is everybody, not just Germans, but everybody has this sort of character flaw that will come out under certain circumstances that will cause people to be to sort of murdering innocent people. I go back and forth between these two viewpoints as a psychologist, and I think that this will come out in one of my later lectures. As a psychologist, I really think Browning's argument fits very well. I don't know enough about pre-Nazi German history to be able to really, I think, evaluate Goldhagen's argument. But on the surface of it, to me, I don't buy it as much. I think it's an interesting argument, it's an interesting book. But the thing is, if you look around the world, you will see lots of genocide perpetrated by non-Germans. And in fact, you will have to look very hard to find someplace somewhere where people haven't perpetrated a genocide at some point in history, at least in the major continents of the world. And so to me, I give a little more credence to this, and this is why I'm going to go into much more detail about this stuff later on. Okay? And these guys, they set these guys up, they have wonderful debates. Some of this stuff are available if you go to YouTube. You can look up some of the debates. And I will say in the debates I've watched, I've still not, Goldhagen, I think, is very interesting ideas. They don't quite convince me. And I think one of the things he's doing is he's taking a polemic. He's taking an extreme position to sort of, sort of bring awareness to what was going on. And I think in that sense I like his work, because it does make people really think about, the Holocaust and what's going on. And Goldhagen has said, somebody asked him, well, what about modern Germans? Are they, and he said, no, they're okay now, because, the things that led up to this eliminationist anti-Semitism are gone. Dr. Baker will come in a few weeks, and he's going to talk to you about child rearing in pre-Reich Nazi Germany, how children were raised, and leading to a generation of adults that perhaps, could fit in with more of a Goldhagen-esque type argument, that these people were raised in such a way that maybe this makes them somehow unique, and that they might be more amenable to at least following these extreme Nazi leaders and doing things. You can make your own judgment about that. I think they don't have to be German. I think they could be anybody, and you put them in the right situation, and you're going to get this kind of behavior. And again, this is the Browning argument, and this is the argument I think to some degree I'm going to make about genocide in general, not about the Nazi perpetrated genocide, because as Reiner said, there are some unique aspects to that, and we could argue whether the unique aspects of the Nazi perpetrated Holocaust have something to do with Goldhagen's argument. I think you might be able to make an argument for that. I don't feel like I'm qualified to make that argument, but I think that could be done, and I think Goldhagen to some degree does that. Yes?
I'm confused. So is he saying it like it's a genetic thing? Or
No,
like
no, he's saying that basically Reiner, correct me here, but due to the sort of history of anti-Semitism in Europe, and due to the influence of some very important people in Germany, like Martin Luther was one of the big ones, who was not anti-Semitic to begin with in his career, and then later on at the end of his career became very anti-Semitic because of the influence of these guys and the situation of where Germany was in Europe and their relationship to the Jewish people, that by the Nazi era they become more eliminationist. Is that rough summary of it?
But isn't that
It's not a genetic thing.
Is
right?
that kind of saying that anyone in that situation though could, in those circumstances, he's kind of like arguing the same?
Yes, to some degree. So you say you take Germany out of Germany's place, and you put France where Germany is,
But those events,
and of course, there was a tremendous amount, and I'll talk about this later on too, there's a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism all through Europe, before the Nazis, and of course, up until the time of the Nazis, some people would argue even nowadays, a lot of anti-Semitism around. So, yes, he's not making a genetic argument, okay? And nor could he in the modern era. And I'm going to get into that. We're going to talk about race and racism and genetics a little bit later on, because that's really almost an impossible. I mean, if he made that argument, people just laugh at him, because you know a lot more about genetics now than people did back in the early 1900s, right? So, yeah. But yes, if you look at the face of things, if you really go deep enough, these arguments, and it's a very good point, these arguments start to blend together a little bit. Okay, they start to blend together a little bit. As a psychologist, I find Browning's arguments to me to be closer to what we know in psychology. I'm going to go in a lot of detail about this. I'm going to talk about the Stanford Prison Experiment. I'm going to talk about the Milgram Experiment, which sort of, to my mind, reinforced this view a little bit. Yes, Reiner.
The interesting thing is, Goldhagen is a political scientist.
Yes.
Browning is a historian.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things that I admire so much when I was doing research in Germany in '97, he came to Germany and he debated some of the biggest German historians at the time, and he held his own.
Yeah.
A very young man held his own.
Yeah.
And actually got a medal from the German parliament for bringing this to the
I mean, I think, for me, I think what Goldhagen has done is taken a polemic, and by doing that has brought attention to this very, very important subject. And he's got people to talk about it, to debate about it. I mean, whether or not you agree with him or not, just the idea that he's gotten people to talk about this and brought ideas out of the shadows, into the sunlight to be discussed, I think is very, very important. And again, I think the debates between these two guys are very, very useful that way, and they continue. Browning is also a very formidable guy, a very, very good historian, very formidable, very good speaker. And so if you have a chance to hear either of them or hear them together, I would highly recommend it. Both are still around. I'm not sure where Goldhagen is. Browning is where, in Georgia somewhere in the
I thought he was at North Carolina.
North Carolina.
He may have been somewhere else.
Yeah, somewhere down in the south. And Goldhagen is, I don't know, he was at Harvard. I don't know where
He
he
was
is.
at Harvard.
Yeah, I don't know where he is now.
Well, the subsequent book is about the Pope. He wrote a book about the Pope, and
Yeah, that's very
which
interesting.
was equally controversial.
Yeah, yeah. Which is something we will not have time to get into in this class, the relationship between Catholic Church and Nazi Germany, but it's a very interesting subject. If somebody wanted to do a paper on that, that would be, pick an individual involved in that, that would be very interesting. I'd be curious to read that. All right. So I mentioned these explanations like the Milgram experiment, and I'm going to talk more in detail about this, and the Stanford Prison experiment. Those psych students, you probably know about these things. I'll talk more about these later on, and we'll see how these things sort of relate to the Nazi era. Okay? So one thing I want to do is one thing we can say about Nazi Germany is that it was a very violent regime. Reiner's going to talk to you pretty soon about the rise of the Nazi Party and how violence was really sort of an integral part of that. And so one thing I think it's important to talk about in this class, considering the Nazi era, is to talk a little bit about human violence. And the idea is violence part of our human nature. Are we, and again, this goes back a little bit to Browning's book, are we capable of these real violent things? I mean, as human beings, this is part of just the nature as human beings to be violent under certain circumstances. And I think the quick answer is yes. And you don't have to look too far to get an idea of this. Just, pull your iPad up and look on the screen and look at the news of today, or, if you still are old-fashioned or read newspapers, take a look or watch TV, and you'll see at any given moment around the world, in the human community of the world, which we now have lots of people in the world, billions and billions, you will find, basically violence going on all over the place. We have violence going on, especially in the Middle East, seems to be quite prone to this. We have violence going on everywhere. Okay? And the violence can take the place of individuals, perpetrating violence on each other, or it can take up all the way up, scales up to nations fighting other nations. But there seems to be quite a lot of this throughout human history. Okay? And I think it would be very, very difficult to deny this because there's just so much of it. And but we have to think, why are humans violent? Why do human beings, why do they have this capability for violence? And again, I'll put on my evolutionary biology hat or evolutionary psychology hat. I like to use evolutionary theory when thinking about these sort of things. And I think human violence is not random. And it would have, of course, back maybe in prehistorical times, certainly had some sort of survival purpose. It had some sort of survival purpose. And again, you can go back to your evolutionary psychology, you can go back to Freud. I like Freud quite a bit. You go back to Freud. What did Freud say were the two driving forces of human beings? Those of you who had my classes before know these. What are they?
Did he say the experiences of adulthood and the childhood?
That's part of it, but what are the two underlying forces that motivate human beings? Eros and Thanatos, right? The drive toward reproduction and the ability to have aggression. Okay? So the reproduction part, we're not going to get to that much in this class, especially there's some interesting reasons why that is. We'll talk a little bit about that later in the Nazi regime, how the Nazis sort of look at that, especially when I talk about Himmler and his human breeding farms. Talk a little bit about that. But mostly, for this class, the purpose of this class, we're going to talk about the Thanatos. We're going to talk about the aggression. And we could talk about Thanatos in the original way that Freud meant it, as a death instinct, right? And again, this is one way you can think about the sort of history of Nazi Germany, is that it's something that rises and then sort of wills itself to die at some point. That the death of the regime is built into into the makeup of it, and again, through the person of the Fuhrer, through the person of Adolf Hitler, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I give a lecture on Hitler later on. Okay? But really, we can think about Thanatos. And Thanatos, really, we can think about it sort of in a more modern sense, a more evolutionary sense, as aggression, right? So if a bug is walking along on the ground, pick your favorite bug, doesn't matter, and I go up to it and I want to smush it, what does that bug do? It has basically two reactions. It either flight, it either runs away, doesn't want to get smushed, right? A bug doesn't have much of a brain, but it knows enough it doesn't want to get smushed. And what's the other thing it'll do? Fight. So let's say it's a bee or a wasp. There's a wasp. I do this. What's it going to do? Turn around, sting, right? It manifests aggression. Why would that creature, as lowly as an insect, which doesn't have much of a brain, why would it have that instinct? Because the wasps that let themselves get smushed didn't reproduce, right? So the ones that are here with us now are ones that were able to defend themselves, and because of that, we're able to reproduce. And so that behavior, that characteristic, has gotten hardwired into its nervous system, and so it has that behavior, right? Now, human beings, of course, are a lot more complex, yet that ability to survive is something that you can go back beyond our primate ancestors, back to our very primitive ancestors that had that. If you look throughout the animal kingdom, and in some degrees the plants kingdom, you will find this ability to manifest aggression because it has a survival value, right? We are all here because our ancestors were able to defend their offspring, to fight off things, maybe manifest aggression to get their dinner, whatever they needed to do. That aggression had a very good survival, it rendered some survival fitness, to use the biological term. And so we're all descendants of that. Okay, so that's one way we can think about aggression in human beings. We can also think about violent criminal acts as being a way of cheating. And we define cheating as taking away resources from others without giving anything in return. If I can go up to somebody, they've got some food, I can go up and you've got some food, and I can just take your food, I can just slap you, grab your food, Pop-Tart, really good, and I can go over that, and there's no consequences, because my aggression is strong, I'm stronger than you, then I may do that. I may be tempted to do that. Again, this is also something you see among primates, and you also see among other animals, and you see it among human beings. Okay? Now, as a human being, you may say, hey, I don't want somebody stealing my food, so I need to manifest aggression to prevent that. So either maybe you become bigger, stronger, or maybe you have a knife and I don't, or maybe you do something else that is very human. You go and say, hey, I can't manifest aggression on my own. That guy's bigger and stronger. I'll get my buddies over here. I'll share my Pop-Tart with them in return for them helping me to defend it against this guy who wants to come and steal it. Maybe I only get a quarter of my Pop-Tart then, but that's better than nothing. Because if I want to come steal, I'm going to take the whole thing, right? So that's another human way that we can manifest group aggression. Right? We can recruit, we can cooperate, something we're very good at doing because we have language. We can cooperate. So this is a way just to get you thinking about things, right? And of course there's lots of examples of human violence and aggression, from the sort of tribal warfare all the way to modern warfare, with modern weapons and things like that. Now, the dominant model for human violence has been based on social psychology and sociological models. However, the current thinking is more that there's more influence from biology and evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology. And then the truth is that both things really must be there. There must be there's something going on in social psychology, something about the human mind in a specific context helps it to manifest violent behavior. Okay? And so again, if you really want to think of these things, you really think of these both working together. What's gone on is the sort of social psychology model, sociological model has been dominant in the field now for the past maybe 30, 40 years. And what's happening, maybe longer than that, and what's happening now is because there's been so much knowledge about biology and evolution that now we're starting to look at re-examine biological models. And this is very interesting because one of the reasons that biological models have sort of gone out of vogue is because of the Nazis. Because the Nazis invoked these racial biological models that really were not very scientific and not very accurate and not very true. And so if you say, well, people are violent because of their biology, they say, well, you're just a Nazi, you're basically stigmatizing a certain group of people, and we can't do that, that's a bad thing, and really people are pretty similar. And so those kind of things went out of vogue in favor of the more sort of sociological, psychological models. Nowadays with modern genetics, we can start looking at the biological models again without necessarily stigmatizing groups of people. Okay? This is still very controversial. Okay? Very controversial, and people still are stigmatized. You guys, anybody here from Oxnard? Any Oxnard people here? In Oxnard that there's been this gang injunction, right? Saying certain individuals gathering in certain places have a propensity for violence, so we're going to have a law that says we can go without any sort of due process and pick these individuals up and put them in jail or arrest them or break them up and have some penalties. This has been very controversial. My understanding is I think now it's not in place anymore. I think it's something that did not work for them. Either it was turned over by the courts as being unconstitutional, or it just didn't work very well. But you could look at this thing and say, again, this is what people are really concerned. Oh, those people look a certain way, right? Racial profiling, this kind of thing. So therefore, they must be violent. They must have propensity for violent acts. And so again, you get into this sort of thing where this sort of racial biological models get into trouble. Okay, so you have to be very careful about that. But there has been some, looking at biological models. And again, what we can do in the biological models is we can look, and we don't have to divide people up by races. We can just look at people in general. As I will tell you many times during this class, people are pretty much genetically very, very similar. Right? That the differences that we have, the small phenotypic differences, are really very small, amounts of genetic material. That we are 99.99%, the same as each other. We're 98% the same as chimpanzees. Okay? So, people are actually much more similar than they are different, even though the outward appearances may be a little different. Inside, we're all pretty much the same. So when you start looking at biological models that look at like people in general. And then we can look at variations among people in general. And one of the big things we've been doing is look at variations in the brains of people. This is somewhat what this book does by this guy. This is Adrian Rain's book on the anatomy of violence. We look at the brains of people. Now, because we have this great scanning technology to look at brains, we can actually look very closely and compare different people's brains and sort of correlate that with violent behavior. And so we're seeing a lot more of that sort of research. And that's been very interesting. But this is research that is very interestingly enough now does not have to involve categories of people, categorizing people by race, which is really something that, how can I put this? It's something that is very common that we do, but has really no biological basis. And I'm going to go into talk in much more detail about race later on, and give you some more details about this. And so we're going to go into that a little bit later on in the semester. Okay. So again, if we go back to this idea of looking at sort of biological explanations for violence, and look at this idea that human beings as a whole have a propensity for violence, not singling out any sort of specific group of humans by their phenotype, but just looking at all humans, we can look and we can start thinking about biological explanations for human aggression. I like to go back to the animal kingdom to look at this, and one of my favorite sort of theories of looking at aggression in the animal kingdom comes from this guy. His name is Conrad Lawrence. Very interesting guy. We don't have time in this class, but I have I'm actually writing a book chapter based on this lecture. And one of the things in this book chapter, I'm going a lot of detail about Lawrence's life. He was a very interesting guy, probably a Nazi collaborator, collaborating and so he could get an academic position. And he wrote a very somewhat controversial paper, probably so that the Nazis would like him and approve him so he could get a job as a professor. So he's a little bit, he collaborated academically with another guy, Tinbergen, who was very anti-Nazi. That happened later on. And by 1973, his Nazi associations are sort of, I don't want to say whitewashed, but sort of fade into the background, and he wins the Nobel Prize along with Timbergen in 1973 for his work on ethology. Ethology is animal behavior. Brilliant guy. Whether you want to forgive him for his writing a paper that's somewhat apologetic for some kind of Nazism or Nazi racial principles, I'll leave that up to you. But a very interesting guy. I like his work on aggression. It's a little simplistic, but I think it puts things into a good perspective as far as what we're going to be talking about in this class. So I like to talk about his categorization of aggression. What's important is that Lawrence comes up with 4 types of aggression: defensive aggression, maternal aggression, predatory aggression, and display aggression. Defensive aggression, you know, I already talked to you about that. There's the wasp. I go to smush it. What does it do? Turns around and tries to sting me. Doesn't want to get eaten. I put one of my favorite animals up here, the skunk, as an example of defensive aggression. Anybody here ever had an encounter with a skunk? And you know, it's pretty heavy duty, right? I tell a story about my dog back in the day. I lived up in Santa Cruz. There's a lot of skunks up in Santa Cruz. And my dog was a dog that was bred to hunt small animals. And it was the middle of the night, kept the door open so she'd go outside in the backyard. And a skunk was walking in there. She saw a small animal. She pounced on it. Skunk blasted her right in the face. She comes running, goes jumping on my bed at 3 in the morning. The smell was so intense, I was hallucinating. Visual hallucinations because the smell was so bad. And I went to the 24-hour Safeway, and because it's Santa Cruz, because they have a lot of skunks, there on the shelf at 3 in the morning are big giant gallon bottles of Skunk Away, which is an enzyme which gets rid of the skunk smell. You know, I'm walking around, even the homeless bums are like, oh God, you know, let's yeah, so very good defensive aggression. And again, this evolved because the skunks don't want to get eaten. And the skunks that didn't get eaten were able to defend themselves, and so they were able to evolve this defense mechanism, right? Maternal aggression, you may know about this. We typically, here I've got grade 8, but we could also think about the one that we know in our popular culture, grizzly moms, because we all know about grizzly bears. What happens, if you see little grizzly bear cubs wandering around the woods and they look so cute, you want to go up, oh, little bear, I want to play with them, right? Bad idea. Because mama's right over there, and if mama sees you interacting with her cubs, she will go ballistic and come and just completely annihilate you, right? And that happens from time to time. People even try to shoot mama with a pistol. That just makes her madder. She'll really get pissed off. Why would you think bears would have this kind of behavior, this sort of maternal aggression, such overprotectiveness of their cubs?
To keep from the other bears in society from eating them and other
The male bears. The male bears will eat the cubs of offspring that are not theirs. Okay, and there's a very good YouTube video out there if you want to watch it. It's really kind of tragic. That's why I didn't show it to you. Where there's polar bears, which are just white grizzly bears that live in the snow. Where a male bear is chasing a female and her cubs, and the cub doesn't go fast enough, and the male bear gets it and kills it and eats it, and the mother bear looks back and it's very sad, and she realizes nothing I can do. So this is why they manifest the aggression. They have to be able to fight off those male bears. Okay? So that's why it's there. So it's a survival thing, right? We could argue whether humans have this type of aggression. I would say they do. Remember that case in Texas a few years ago where the woman put a hit out on the rival for her daughter was going out for cheerleading, wanted to be head cheerleader, and the mom put a hit out on the other kid who was going to be head cheerleader. Kind of a twisted version of this kind of maternal aggression. Predatory aggression. You know this one, or maybe you don't know it, because now when we want to get a nice lunch, some meat for lunch, we just go over to Ralph's and just go to the meat section and get a nice cut of steak and go home and grill it up, right? But that wasn't always the case in human history. Not too long ago, if you wanted a nice, juicy piece of meat, you had to go out and catch it, right? So again, to be able to manifest aggression to go get your lunch, especially, get a lunch full of high-density protein, which has, there's a lot of people who argue that human beings became hunters, or people became smart because human beings became better hunters, they could get a higher source of protein, denser food, to power this big brain, and these things had a reciprocal relation with each other. This is why human beings became so smart. It had to do with hunting. Of course, human beings have a long history of hunting. I can talk about that in this class. But again, predatory aggression, very important. When you lunch, and here you have some lions getting their lunch here, attacking water buffalo. And again, they can't do this in a nice way. Will you just please like lie over and die so I can eat you? No, you have to actually. That animal has defensive aggression. It doesn't want to get eaten, so it fights or flights, right? And these guys have predatory aggression. They want their lunch. Okay, and so those two things. This is the animal kingdom, right? And the last one is display aggression. And display aggression, well, predatory aggression is usually between different species. Display aggression is usually among animals of the same species. And usually what these animals are doing, animals that have display aggression typically exist in some sort of a dominance hierarchy, where there's dominant individuals and less dominant individuals, and they might vie for resources or for access to mates, especially males vying for access to females. There is some of the opposite in some cases, but a lot of times you see males for territory or for food, and you see this display aggression. Anybody here have dogs? So if you have dogs and you're out walking your dog and your dog meets another dog, what do? First they sniff each other's butts. That's like establishing identity, and then they may or may not, depending on the size difference and these kind of things, they may or may not show some display aggression. Especially dogs around the same size might show display aggression. One will show dominance over the other one. The other one will either can challenge that dominance, and this is why you sometimes get fights, right? Or one will back down. Okay, you can be the dominant one, right? And this is usually dogs around the same size. If you have a huge dog and a small dog, generally the dogs are smart. They know what time it is. That one's way bigger than me. I'm just going to be, And what does your dog do when it shows submission? Rolls over, it shows its belly. Ever see your dog do this in another dog, or another dog do this to your dog? That's showing submission, and then they don't have display aggression. Anybody here have your dog get in a fight with another dog while you're out walking it? They start growling at each other, and then they're like, that's display aggression, right? It's built in, right? It's built into them. Okay? And so you'll see this a lot. And again, we can make an argument that we see this in the human among humans. We certainly see it among primates. Really, so I know we're running out of time, but to give the long story short, you see all these sort of things among primates. And again, as human beings being primates, we manifest all these things. They don't manifest in such a perfectly categorized pattern, pigeonholed pattern. As human beings, we have a lot of mixtures of these things. These things mixed together. Okay? A lot of mixture of these things. Now, I want to show you the Battle of Kruger Park. We're going to run out of time, so I don't know if I should.
Intently watching the buffalo, or moving right over there. This could be very interesting. That is a huge buffalo.
That's a huge buffalo.
It's a huge buffalo.
Even the lion.
No, they're too young. The one's gone already.
Don't you think they're there's a little?
I don't know. I think they're a bit young. I don't know. Maybe. Oh, he's looking at getting they're getting ready.
They're crouching.
She's quite big.
Does that mean attack position? Yeah, it's attack position. Where's that female? Can't see it.
Uh-oh. What's the bull gonna do?
Gonna grab the baby. I'll grab the baby, watch.
She's going for him, she's going for him. She got him. Oh, she did, she got him.
Baby, he's gone, he's just clocked a buffalo here. Oh my God. God, did you see that? Oh my God, yes. Unbelievable. Oh, guys, I'm shaking. Can you believe this? The buffalo are coming to help this one now, watch.
They're too
They'll
late.
come and help this baby, watch.
They're too late. Can they help him now, Frank?
Yeah, they can.
He's still alive, you think?
Oh, he's still alive.
My goodness.
Russell for Frank.
They're trying to drag him out. They're dragging him out.
Hulle het nou net 'n kleintjie gevang. Hier's lekker action hier so, jong. Hulle het 'n kleintjie hier so in die water en die trop is besig om nader te kom.
It's on its back. I hope they kill it quickly.
Oh, it's still alive.
Ja, positief. Hulle het 'n klein buffeltjie gevang hier so.
There's a crocodile there too.
Ja, daar's 'n krokodil ook. Daar gaan 'n krokodil ook die kleintjie.
The
Yes.
crocodile crocodile.
Yeah.
Coming out
Look
big
at that.
guy.
Check through the banners. The croc's trying to grab the baby.
Yes. Oh, good gracious.
Look at this. The crocodile's taking that baby away.
Poor little thing getting
Oh my
on
God.
both sides. There are two crocodiles.
They're gonna lose it.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
they're going to fight over it.
Jeez, I'm shaking.
Oh my God.
Oh, he's coming for huge crocodile. Three.
Oh, look at those. Oh,
The lions have won.
the lions have won.
Signs of
No, the
war.
lions have won.
Yeah, but look at all those buffalo coming.
No, they're gonna come and try and chase the lion, but I think they're too late.
I think you're right. They're way too late now.
Oh, they're going to chase him. Come on.
No, they're too late.
Oh, look at the teeth.
Look at them. They're going to chase him.
You're too late.
Check this.
You're too late.
You guys, you cannot believe what's going on here. There's a big party here between lions, crocodiles, and buffaloes.
Look at them all.
Whoa! He swatted at him, he kicked at him. He's kicking at him, look. He's kicking at him.
Look at him run.
Ja, julle ouens, julle moet sien wat hier aangaan, jong. Die buffels is besig om die leeu's te omsingel hierso en hulle want die leeu's het 'n klein nyatie gevang. En hierdie nyaties wil die leeu's nou bykom. Hulle jag die leeu's links en regs.
Ooh, they got him surrounded.
Ja, jy kan maar kom, jong. Hier's
And that one's.
Ooh!
Oh,
Chasing him.
they bored him.
Come on, John.
Oh my God.
Chasing him. Will he go in the water?
They got the lion on him, run.
That little buffalo's still alive.
Brave king of the beast. The others are doing though. They're getting him at the other end. Go on, Buffalo.
Yes. Can you believe this?
Never seen that before.
I've never seen anything like
The
that.
calf's still alive.
It is?
Yeah, it's trying to get away. It's standing up.
It is, it's still alive. Oh, is it? Oh, and they're putting them into the water. It's standing up. It's standing up. It's run away.
Ja, they've got
He's
it back.
gone.
It's got it back.
They've got him back. They do have him back.
Ja, hierdie buffels het die leeu's weggevat van hy kleintjie af en
They got it back. They're cutting the other ones.
We're still chasing.
check.
Back in with the herd. Oh. And they're two lions. Oh, they're going back. No, they're two lions.
This is unbelievable.
This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
I've never seen anything like this.
Look, they're running. Look at them running.
There's two left.
Gee, they chased him away.
Sure enough.
But they hooked the one. Did you see they hooked the one?
They looked the one.
Go on, Buffalo, go on. Oh, the big one.
Oh, run.
Okay, so that's the battle at Kruger Park, and just to give you a demonstration of this kind of thing, there are lots of videos. The one you may know from the political campaigns back last year, or 2016, I guess 2 years, was the honey badger. You saw that one, the honey badger don't give a SHIT, right? That's another one. The honey badger videos are really interesting. I should show you the Snoop Dogg and the iguanas and the snakes. That's really good. I'll leave it up to you guys to watch that on your own. That's one of the best animal videos I think that's ever been made. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about display aggression. We didn't see that in the video, but display aggression is often related to sexual access and access to mates. And I can show, where's my thing here? It's one of those mornings this morning. I'm still waking up here. So again, these are cichlid fish. These are the cousins to those fighting fish you see in the, you get at the aquarium. You can buy at the pet store. These are tropical fish, and they establish a territory. They have some very interesting strategies for mating strategies. But the alpha males, seem to be brightly colored, are known to fight and fend off any other sort of males that come into their territory. These males, by the way, disguise themselves as looking like females, and they slip in and they fertilize the eggs of the alpha males. So what happens is the alpha males control a territory, the females lay the eggs in that territory, the alpha male comes along and fertilizes the eggs, kind of sprays out over there, and these sort of bachelor males that disguise themselves, they look like females, and they come in and they also, this guy doesn't notice them, they come in and they fertilize the eggs. So it's a weird, interesting strategy. But they fight. So they have display aggression. They're brightly colored. You see this in the animal kingdom very commonly, brightly colored. Display aggression can take lots of different forms. I don't know if you've ever seen peacocks put out a display. That's why they have all those feathers and everything. It's not really aggressive, but it is a display type of thing. So this is very common in the animal kingdom. You see display aggression among primates, among monkeys. Usually this is around sexual access of the males to the females. And human beings may follow a lot of the primate patterns. Let's talk a little bit about evolution. We'll move away from those types of aggression. Before we go on, I do want to say those types of aggression are really, for human beings, because we have big brains and big imaginations, it's very rare to find those types of aggression just by themselves. Predatory aggression, human beings, the straightforward predatory aggression, some people like to hunt, and so, you see some people doing that. You don't see a lot of, as much, the predatory aggression in our society has really been symbolized a lot. We don't go out and typically hunt our meat, for lunch. It's 9 o'clock now, lunchtime in 3 hours, so we need to go out and find a rabbit out there and, run it down and kill it and skin it and roast it over a fire. Most of us are not going to be doing that today for lunch, right? So our predatory aggression is highly symbolized. Display aggression, very highly symbolized. Maternal, paternal, parental aggression, also symbolized to some degree, but we do see that from time to time. Anybody here ever play Little League, or kids who play like Little League or soccer or anything like AYSO? You find out, like my friend's a ref for AYSO, and you'll find out that typically the fights that happen are not among the kids playing the game, it's usually among the parents. Hey, my kid got a bad call, the ref, and they get in there and start fighting. So a lot of the rules in Little League and AYSO are not addressed at the kids, they're addressed at the parents. Very interesting. That could be a form of paternal aggression. Okay? So in human beings, these things are often mixed up. They're often very mixed. They're not so easy to, they're not so pure. Now let's talk a little bit about evolution. Jared Diamond, who's a UCLA professor, has written a couple books. They're all very good, by the way. I highly recommend them. One of his books is called The Third Chimpanzee. And in this book, he makes the case that human beings are just another sort of species of chimpanzee. We're sort of the third chimpanzee. And the other two are chimpanzees proper and also bonobos. And those are very interesting. creatures, and if you take some of my other classes, my Friday class, which by the way, shameless plug, still has room, I will talk a little bit about primate and bonobo sexual habits and sexual patterns. This is quite fascinating. We also have a professor, a newer professor, Dr. Campbell, Matt Campbell. He teaches a class on animal behavior. I highly, highly recommend that. I think it's for anybody going to be a psychologist, especially understanding animal behavior will give you a lot of insight into human psychology. This is one of the reasons also why I include this stuff in this class. But you can take his class and really get into the nitty-gritty of it. Okay. So in Diamond's book, he asks two questions. There's two questions that come up. First of all, do animals routinely kill one another for non-food purposes? And so this would be either defensive aggression or it would be display aggression. And we can sort of narrow this down and say maybe display aggression. Do animals routinely kill one another, kill somebody, another creature in the same species for non-food purposes? And the second question, which actually arises from the first, is that is genocide rare among humans or a common phenomenon? Okay. And I think you can figure out the answers to these. The answer to number one is yes. Not all animals, but some. And among those some, we would include primates, certain primates. And the answer to the second question, I think you'll get by the end of this lecture, is genocide rare among human beings. I hope to convince you that genocide is not a rare event, even though it's not happening right now here among us, which is really good. It is, if you look even just at the smallest scope of human history, even 50, 100 years, you will see genocide, lots of genocide all over the place. And again, I mentioned chimps. Chimps are very close cousins to us. I think I mentioned to you that we share 98% of our DNA with chimps. Chimps are very violent creatures. By the way, public service announcement, if you go over to somebody's house and they have a pet chimp, and especially if that pet chimp is taking antidepressant drugs, like Prozac or Zoloft, it's time for you to turn around, get in your car, and drive away. Because those animals are very, very dangerous. And there's been a number of cases where the chimps have been pets, living with human beings, and they have just, gone off the rocker or whatever reason, using a clinical term there. They've suddenly switched into some aggressive behavior. And chimps are very inefficient killers. They don't have big teeth, they don't have claws, so what they do is bite and rip. And they generally try to do that to the soft parts of the body. Face, genitals, this kind of thing. And so you'll see people who've been mauled by chimps are horribly disfigured. Horribly disfigured. And this is what they do in the wild as well. And so again, having a chimp as a pet, especially some chimp that came from the wild, very, very bad idea. Very bad. And there was a case, I think a few years ago, down in Simi Valley or something, and somebody was mauled by a chimp, and there was a very famous case on the East Coast not too long ago, and the human beings just sustained, horrible, horrible wounds. Okay? Chimps are much stronger than you. You may think you're Arnold Schwarzenegger hitting the gym every day, or like the Jersey Shore kids, gym tan laundry, you may think shooting up steroids. You may think you're really strong. By the way, they'll be in my other class. I'll talk a little bit about them. But chimp is probably, 4 to 5 times stronger than a human being. Okay? So you can hit the gym all you want. Chimp is still going to, you do not want to, sort of tangle with the chimp. Okay? Very, very bad for you. So display is very interesting. Unlike human beings, there's some ways that chimps are very different than human beings. There's some ways where our aggression and sexuality are really similar, and there's some ways where they're really different. Human beings have some very interesting, unique things. Again, I'm not going to go into those in this class. My Friday class, I will talk about those. But most animals, other than humans, the females tend to go into estrus cycles. They tend to go into heat. If you have dogs or cats, you know about this, right? They're not fertile all the time, okay? And they advertise their fertility by display, which you see here. All right. That's all I'm going to talk about chimps. We could go in a lot more in detail about them. If you're interested in chimps, especially about the sexuality stuff, which is fascinating, come and take my Friday class, and I will go into that. And I think you'll learn something you've never known before. I almost can guarantee it. Also, you'll learn why human beings have fetishes, especially male human beings have fetishes. This is part of our primate history. So again, I'm not going to go into that stuff. That's shameless plug. Let's talk about group aggression. So it's fine to be one-on-one, but let's say I want something. Let's say this young man has something I want. He's got a mate. He's got some banana trees over there in his territory. I want those things. So you know what? I'm going to go and take them. But I get up here. Yeah, I don't know. He's kind of probably looks like he's stronger than me. That's going to be a risk on me. You know, maybe I can hit him with a stick when he's not looking or something. But it's not a very good return on my investment. So I think I'm just going to leave it. I'll leave it. But let's say I'm hanging out with my friends. I'm not kidding, guys. Got him there. He's got some good mates and some big bananas. I think we should go and get those. You guys all, yeah, we can split up one of those for you, right? Okay. Now, 3 of us go over there. Now it looks like really, he may be stronger than me, but he's not stronger than 3 of us. So now the calculus has changed. Now the calculation has changed. And I can plan on sort of, if you want to put it in business terms, a return on investment is much better. And so this is a characteristic of primate aggression, primate group aggression. That what you will typically see in primate aggression is animals doing this sort of return on investment calculation. Where, like, what's the risk? Well, it's 3 against 2 is in the picture, or 3 against 1, or 5 against 3. Now I think, that's pretty good odds on my part. And I think I can go ahead and attack that other creature, get his stuff. All right? So you see this in primate aggression. And this is very common in primates, and it's also very common among human beings. Anybody here practice martial arts? Anybody here do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something like that? Practice martial arts? I will make the case, not to be, flippant about it. I like all martial arts. I think they're all really good. They all have something to offer. But if your martial art is not preparing you for dealing with multiple opponents, then it is not a martial art that is optimized for self-defense. Because in human situations, if you're you go down to Skid Row in LA and you're walking around in the middle of the night, it's more likely that if you're going to get attacked, you're going to be attacked by more than one person. You're a big hulking guy walking around, some other guy one-on-one isn't going to attack, unless there's a clear advantage. Like he has a gun and you don't. So weapons also come into this. We can get into that a little bit later. But let's just say for now it's not weapons. It's just, you're a big hulking guy, he's a big hulking guy. Yeah, too risky, right? 2 big hulking guys and 1 guy, that's different. Or somebody who appears to be weaker than you. That it's different. But most human attacks, most mungies are usually 2, 3, 4, or 5 on 1. Okay? They're very rarely 1-on-1. Okay? Unless there's weapons involved. So just so you know that. Okay? And again, we see this in human beings. We could also say we see this in large group conflicts such as wars. That one country will not typically go to war with another country unless in their minds the leaders of that country, the leaders of the army, they feel like they have an advantage. They have an advantage in weapons or size or strategy, whatever it may be. And of course, you're going to see some of this when we study Nazi Germany. Why the Nazis felt like they could go to war, because they believed they had an advantage, and they had an advantage in war materiel. In some cases, they had an advantage in numbers, and in a lot of cases, that they felt they had an advantage in strategy. And we'll talk to you more about the strategies, and you're going to read in your book as well about the Blitzkrieg strategy. And the Nazis felt that they had an advantage. And so when they have an advantage, then it's okay to go and attack, And you go attack somebody who appears to be weaker, Poland. You're very successful, and you think to yourself, yeah, that was a good strategy, that was a good thing. We'll go find other people like this. Okay? And then the problem is, and we'll get into this later, the problem is that you start to believe your own hype. Oh yeah, those guys, that they're going to be a pushover. They're weaker than us. Right? You start making mistakes. Okay, we could talk a little bit about the evolution of torture in primates. I'll just mention this briefly. The idea that primates are inefficient killers. They don't have teeth and claws. They just go for the soft parts of the body. When primates attack a member of their group, or they attack another primate, typically what will happen is they will maim that primate. They will not kill it. And then the typical monkey that's been attacked will crawl off into the bushes and die very slowly. And some people have thought that maybe this is, you know, that the propensity that human beings have for torturing other human beings may be the sort of leftover, the inefficiency of primate or of chimpanzee killing. It's an interesting thought. I don't think there's any proof on this. It's an interesting thought. Again, like genocide, torture is very common among human beings. And this would make, I think, a very, very interesting doctoral dissertation. If somebody wanted to do this and go on and study this stuff. I think it's quite fascinating. Okay, this is something new that I thought I would mention. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about differences in chimps and human beings. Chimps have excellent short-term working memory and perception, and human beings have excellent long-term memory and the ability to plan ahead. So again, the idea that humans take all these primate traits and are able to symbolize them more, okay? And there's more imagination involved, so they don't have to be as direct. The patterns don't have to be as direct as we see in primates. We can see more elaboration in human beings. Now, why do chimps have excellent short-term memory and perception and humans have long-term memory? This may be due to the fact that the primates that became humans left trees and went to live on the savanna, went to live on the plain. And on the plain, there were a lot more predators, and you know, those primates, those proto-human primates, needed planning ability to deal with you know, this new sort of harsher, more dangerous environment. And so they gave up sort of the short-term working memory in order to have long-term memory and planning. And there's a lot of people doing research on this. It's really quite a fascinating topic. If you take a chimp, for instance, and what you do is you put these numbers up on the board and you go to pattern, boop, 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 real quick, right? The chimps can like just immediately just repeat the pattern. Human being, you know, you can do this to maybe 3 or 4 numbers, and then it starts getting really fast and you'll start making mistakes. The chimp will not, okay? Because the chimp needs that immediate perception, the idea they're swinging around in trees, things need to be a little more immediate. And this is a big difference in human beings. And this is a big difference in my mind about how violence manifests in human beings. We're a lot more creative about it. And we do a lot more long-term planning with our violence than chimps do. Now, deadly violence among humans. Again, I hope I've convinced you a little bit that, you know, violence among humans has some animal and especially some primate precedents, and that we follow primate patterns. We kill both male and females for territory and resources. We also kill males and spare females for rape. Lastly, we often mimic the inefficiency of our chimp cousins through tortures. Now, unlike animals, because we have this long-term planning ability, and we have another great thing that's really wonderful, we have these hands that are tied to our big, imaginative, long-term planning brain. This allows us to make things. Human beings, above all, are tool makers. Homo sapiens are tool makers. We make tools. What are some of the first tools that we make? Are weapons. Okay, now there is some evidence that primates, that chimpanzees also might use sticks and, you know, might use primitive weapons, but it takes human beings to really make some deadly weapons. And so what we do as humans is we amplify our ability for violence through our enormous intellectual capacity for tool making. In other words, we can compensate for that inefficient killing of our fingers and teeth, we don't have really big weapons, by creating tools that are weapons. Okay? And so this is the thing that really differentiates human beings from apes. At least so far, those of you who follow the Planet of the Apes movies know that this is possibly something that in the future you could breed smart apes and they could start doing human type things, and they could have guns and things like this. I will tell you now this is technically feasible. That there have been some studies where they've now been able to insert genes, I think using CRISPR techniques, into other animals. They've now done this with mice. They've inserted human genes into mice, for neurological genes, brain genes, and are able to produce mice that are smarter. And so this is a technique that probably could be applied to apes. And so if you think Planet of the Apes is just fiction, some mad scientists out there could actually go and start tampering around with the brains of monkeys, of chimpanzees, of great apes, and you never know what might happen. You already saw in the news the rogue Chinese scientist who did these CRISPR babies. He changed the DNA of the babies. Who knows, there might be a scientist somewhere doing that with great apes, breeding an army of superhuman intelligent apes who are able to use weapons. So, welcome to the future. Hasn't happened yet as far as we know. Again, you know, I could give you all sorts of examples. of human cruelty. We're going to talk about a lot of them this semester. But again, when I talk about rape and torture and violence, these are actually from the Asian part of World War II. These are Japanese soldiers, basically, who rape women. They force these women into sexual slavery. They do all sorts of cruel torture-like killing. They would use live human beings for bayonet practice. You see here, and then they would also chop off people's heads, execute people, execute the males, and this was common in the Japanese conquest of China. There's a lot of real atrocities. We're not going to get into a lot of those. I'll talk to you a little bit later on in the semester about some medical experimentation the Japanese done after we talked about the German stuff. The Japanese were every bit as cruel and despicable as the Nazis. Okay? Unlike Germany, because the generations of Germans after World War II have, I think, done a fairly good job of trying to come to grips with what went on in the Nazi era. The Japanese have not. They've kind of glossed over. And don't get me wrong. I love Japan. Japan's one of my favorite places in the world. I love the Japanese people. I love Japanese culture. But this is an area where the Japanese have not done a great job coming to grips with their behavior during World War II. So we're not going to talk much about this, but again, if you want some examples, human examples of some of these things I'm talking about, these primate patterns, you don't have to look very far. Now, one good thing about human beings is that we can ritualize our aggression, especially display aggression. And so, for instance, this is the trope of every football movie. Here you have the females on display and the males display aggression, fighting against each other, and then the winning quarterback gets the cheerleader, right? That's every football movie that's ever been made, right? Well, this would be a typical primate pattern, right? The alpha males battle it out on the field, and the winner gets the females. Now, the nice thing about this, that we're able to do this, is that we don't have to kill each other. We can go smash each other on the football field, and people won't have to die. So human beings are pretty good at ritualizing aggression. We could make a case that some international commerce might be ritualized aggression, right? We're not going to necessarily go to war with China. We're not going to go over there and start shooting Chinese people or have them start shooting us, but what we might have is a trade war. What does a trade war entail? It means my giant 65-inch screen TV is now going to cost, $2,000 instead of the $500 it's now on sale for over at Fry's, right? Because there'll be a trade war, right? That's maybe a little better than killing each other, so we can ritualize this kind of stuff. Okay? We don't do it that well. As you can look in any newspaper or any online news source, you will see that there's plenty of places right now in the world where human beings are killing each other, and killing each other in rather horrible ways. But there is also a lot of places where we are doing this aggression against each other in a ritualized form. All right. Human beings, like primates, will kill their species under specific conditions. These conditions can be characterized as an imbalance of power. Okay, so again, the thing I talked about, my three friends getting together, we'll go after the guy over there. If there's an imbalance of power, that sets up a situation when killing can occur. Okay? Attacking an enemy with overwhelming force, attacking an enemy that can't defend themselves, often for clear gains. This is what you typically see. However, and these are in conditions of imbalance. Conditions of imbalance. So it's one guy walking down the street, there's three of us, we want what he has. Maybe he's got a cool jacket or something, we go and take it from him. But what about conditions of balance? What about conditions where both sides are essentially stalemated? Two big guys meeting in the alley in the middle of the night, what happens there? This is, when we have conditions of balance, human beings tend to have a reluctance to kill each other. So very interestingly enough, we have kind of two kinds of programming as human beings. We have programming to kill in certain situations, and we have programming not to kill in certain situations. And so this is very, very interesting. So in situations of balance, we tend not to become violent. Okay? We tend to have a little bit of a taboo against killing another human being. And again, if you take Reiner and I's World War I class, which I'm not sure when we're going to offer it again, we'll talk a lot about this because this kind of stalemating stuff really happened during trench warfare in World War I. Okay? Both sides were stalemated, and then they came to sort of tacit agreements. Look, I'll send a note over to the German side. Hey, you guys, my commanding officer's he's he's telling us we're going to shell over this side of the field, at 4 o'clock, so make sure you're not there, right? And then the Germans would move, and then the Germans would be shelling them, and they would send a note over saying, hey, our commanding officer said, hey, we're going to send a shell over your way, at 5, so make sure you're not there. So a lot of this tacit stalemating stuff sort of coming into play in World War II, in trench warfare. Okay. There's the famous Christmas episode of Reiner, when was it, 1914, where the two sides, they were mostly British and German. French. So French were there too. So French, British, and German. French and British fighting the Germans, and then it was Christmas Day, and they called a truce and went out in the middle of the war zone and played soccer and hung out and exchanged gifts and had a smoke with their German buddies, and then went back at the end of the day. There's a movie about it. There's a commercial about it. There's that was a Hallmark commercial or something. There's a commercial about it. But it's a thing that it didn't happen all the times in World War I, but it happened in places where you had this sort of stalemating going on. And there's some other things involved too, but essentially this stalemate, where people were really reluctant to kill each other. And so you find in World War I, people were probably 1 in 15 soldiers would actually shoot to actually hit an enemy. And probably that guy, 1 in 15, was probably some sort of psychopath guy who liked killing. And the other ones would either just carry rifles, or they would shoot and just miss on purpose. It's live and let live, they call it. Now, you don't have as much of this in World War II. And there's a reason for that, and the reason is you don't have as much stalemating going on. That the war is now, war strategy, and you're going to hear about this from Dr. Norris later on in the semester, the war strategy is now very mobile. And so war is blitzkrieg, it's mobility, it's moving in, and so much less chances of stalemates. And so what happens is that World War II is a moving war, and you don't have these kind of truces and things like this. Okay. Now near the end of the war, when Germany's clearly losing, you have lots of people giving up. That's a different thing. Dr. Bushman's going to talk to you about that later. But you don't have this sort of stalemating thing. And so what happens in human violence is that you have these two sort of competing things. And if conditions become a certain way, you have certain conditions, then human beings will become more violent and will become killers. Okay? And there's a number of ways this happens. One of the first ways that human innate reluctance to kill our own species can be overcome is by dehumanizing the enemy. This is one of the first things. So, they're not really human. They're not really human. They're really a subhuman. They're really not human beings. They might look on the outside like a human being, but they don't have a soul. Something like that, right? And so there's a number of ways that we get over the reluctance to kill. I'm going to talk about these a little bit later. And these are sort of the steps to genocide. And again, you can see here, and by the way, this comes from this book by this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. Very good book, very interesting, on killing, psychological cost of learning to kill in war and society. Very interesting book, I highly recommend it. And this is also from Grossman's book here, Predisposition of the Killer. These are the things that would lead somebody to kill. How you overcome that innate, sort of stalemate, reluctance to kill. Somebody in authority telling you to do it, people in your group that you identify with telling you to do it, supporting you for doing it, training, conditioning, these kind of things. Physical distance makes a big difference. Emotional distance makes a big difference. Right? So one of the reasons why you're going to see, perhaps, at least in the beginning of the war, that the Nazis, are maybe treat the Western powers, the Western people that are fighting the French and the British, maybe a little better than they treat the Russians, has to do with some of this. Cultural distance. They are brainwashed, or they are taught that the Russians are subhumans. They're very different than them. It's where the British and the French are pretty similar. They're just sort of misguided. Okay. Now later, as Dr. Bushman is going to tell you later on, is that near the end of the war, sort of the lid comes off, and the brutality sort of ends up being everywhere. But at least in the beginning, there's a little bit more of this kind of thing. And at the very end of the war. Mostly probably because the Germans are worried about retaliation from the Soviets, and they've also heard of all these Soviet atrocities against Wehrmacht soldiers. They want to go and give up to the West. They see, they'd rather surrender to the British or the Americans and the French. There were some that surrendered to the French. There were some French units that Wehrmacht soldiers surrendered to, because they feel like they're a little more like them, right? And then they also aren't as afraid of them as they are of the Russians. And so Reiner's going to talk to you a lot about that. Okay, so we can talk about, so if we talk about, again, ways of getting ordinary people to sort of start killing people, those are some of the psychological characteristics. I'm going to go in more detail about this when I talk about the ordinary men, and we'll talk a little bit about the Milgram experiment, the Stanford Prison experiment later on. We'll get into some of that. But what about the people, that 1 in 15, like in World War I, who actually was doing the killing? Could we say that these people are psychopaths or sociopaths? Or as we now call in psychology, antisocial personality disorder. So one of the first things I want to tell you about, learn some psychology in this class, is that what is the difference between a sociopath, a psychopath, and somebody with antisocial personality disorder? Because these terms are pretty much used interchangeably. Anybody know? A sociopath is somebody who is essentially raised in conditions that cause them to behave in an antisocial way. It's all nurture, not nature. A psychopath is somebody who is born a psychopath. It's all nature, not nurture. And antisocial personality disorder is the term that we now use in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatry to describe anybody who has these sort of characteristics of behavior that we can talk about. Okay? Characteristic of behavior that they'll do anything for their own gain. I mean, it's like people without a conscience. Okay? Psychopath, sociopath, these are terms that are sort of outdated. We don't use them as much anymore because, of course, we always think now that things are both nature and nurture. There's both come into play. And we know, for instance, people who are diagnosed as antisocial personality disorder are more likely to have been abused as children. So we know there's some nurture stuff in there. We also know there may be some heritable traits, these things, so we know it can be a little bit of both. Sometimes they'll talk about primary and secondary psychopathy. You don't need to worry about that. That won't be in the test. But again, this idea that somebody's a primary psychopath, just they're born that way. Okay? Lady Gaga, right? Just born this way, right? But we tend to now think in more modern terms, it's always nature and nurture together. Okay? So we say antisocial personality disorder, that's a mouthful. So I will likely just use the word psychopath because we all know what it is. It's a common word used in the language, even though it's not now the technically correct diagnosis. It's a common term used in the language. A lot of people, even in the field, still refer to psychopathic individuals, so I will probably use the word psychopath or sociopath. Okay? Well, here I say sociopath, but you know what I mean. And according to Grossman, it may be that the people who are doing the killing in the war, when everybody else is reluctant, the people who are doing the killing are these psychopaths or sociopaths. He doesn't think it's a good idea to form elite units of psychopaths because they'll end up killing their own people because they don't really care. They don't really, they're all out for them. They don't really care about taking sides. There's also some objections to this idea. Again, the idea that psychopathy is a spectrum. You're not a psychopath or not, you're a spectrum. You may have just some psychopathic characteristics and not be a full-blown psychopath. And there's been some interesting studies of this. For instance, they found that CEOs of big companies tend to have more psychopathic characteristics than the average person. Because you got to be willing to fire 10,000 people or lay off 10,000 people. And most people would be, I took probably these people their livelihood. They might feel bad about it, but your CEO, that's kind of what you got to do, so you do it. So there's been some interesting studies about that. Again, the role of psychopaths in wartime would be a very interesting study, dissertation study. So that'd be another very fascinating thing you could do in graduate school to take a look at. People who are more psychopathic are more likely to kill in conditions of balance. So that's one way to think about it. Your ordinary people are going to be reluctant to kill in conditions of balance. The psychopath will not be, because there's some gain for them. Okay, I sort of mentioned this guy again. So the problem with starting to talk about psychopaths and everything is you get into the biology of things, and you get into sort of like biology of violence, and you can start to say, well, maybe certain kind of people are more prone to certain kind of violence because that's just their nature. Okay, and this was an idea that was very popular among people who studied criminals. Especially in the 19th century and even into the 20th century. And this guy, Cesare Lombroso, was the first to postulate brain differences in criminals. Criminals had different kind of brains. They were more atavistic. They were a throwback to a more primitive, savage state. And he was one of the first to come up with an evolutionary hierarchy. The people who were more likely to be criminals, all up to sort of the people at the top who were less likely to be criminals. And of course, he was Italian. He was Italian, North Italian, and Jewish. And so he put Northern Italians and Jews at the top of the list, and he put Southern Italians, where there's a lot of crime in Southern Italy, at the bottom, along with Bolivians and Peruvians. I don't know why Bolivians and Peruvians. We put those down. Now, these views had some basis in the science, supposed science of phrenology, which is to read the bumps on the head. This was very common in the 1800s. A lot of people believed in this. By the way, this is not very scientific. It's been long abandoned. So do not go feel you can read some bumps on somebody's head and say, oh, they're a criminal, right? That's how they used to do it. These kind of ideas really influenced the Nazis and the fascists quite a bit. The Nazis put the Jews at the bottom of the list, and I'm going to go into that in detail. I'm going to talk to you about the Nazi racial hierarchies later on in the semester. I'll go into a lot of detail about that. Okay? So biological theories, by the 20th century, really started to fall into disrepute, and people really took up more of the nurture rather than nature. And this, especially in America, under the influence of the behaviorists. Because behaviorists don't really concern too much about nature. They really like nurture. And so, well, you put somebody in this environment and you raise them, they're going to become a sociopath and be willing to kill people. Okay, so these kind of biological ideas about proneness to violence have really fallen by the wayside to some degree. But we're seeing a resurgence in this now, especially with the ability to do imaging of the brain, and we can look at the brain of a psychopath, and you can compare it with a normal person. Here you go, this is a psychopathic murderer. You can see the emotional centers of the brain are really lit up, but the rational reasoning centers are kind of dim, and this is a normal person. So it may be that there is something, there might be differences, at least not necessarily say among killers, but definitely among psychopaths and normal people. And here's another slide showing you this. And the interesting thing about this slide is, first of all, this is the author's brain. I don't know why he felt he needed to put that in there to show that he had such a great brain. Here's a normal person. Here is your typical kind of psychopathic murderer, impulsive murderer. But here in the middle, this is your serial killer. This is very interesting. Because your serial killer still has these emotional centers lit up, but is also able to use the planning and rational part of the brain to satisfy these emotional needs. And so the serial killers are really, really interesting. And it's one of the reasons they don't. A lot of these kind of guys that do really impulsive things, they get caught. Okay, these guys don't want to get caught, and they can figure out ways not to get caught. And so serial killers are the kind of murderers who don't want to get caught, and so they're very hard to catch. And again, take my other class. I'm going to talk in some detail about this in the other class on Friday. But again, you can see these differences here. This guy is really scary because he's able to use his full brain to get what he wants. This guy is more impulsive. So you have levels of psychopathy. Levels of psychopathy. And we're going to see this among, we can maybe see this pattern among some of the Nazis that we're going to talk about. Your normal guy, your ordinary man I'm going to talk about, who's this guy. You have somebody who's just sort of an impulsive, sadistic sort of murderers, or this guy. And then you have people who plan the murders. Okay? And you can see some of this pattern among Nazi leaderships. I'm going to show you this. Again, it's another same thing. So again, we can look at these two individuals. I'm blanking on this guy's name right here. This is Derweiler. So this is an individual who was.
You have the subtext.
Oh, thank you. God, you got a good name. Derweiler.
I've seen its introduction.
Okay. So you have this guy, Derwanger. He was led the infamous SS Derwanger Brigade. It was a penal battalion. They got prisoners. And most sickest, most vicious criminals in the Reich. And Derwanger took these guys out, and he took them out on missions and did all sorts of terrible things in addition to killing people and being quite sadistic. He supposedly raped 2 13-year-old girls. He lost his doctor title after being in prison. He had a doctorate in something. He fought in the Spanish War. He volunteered for the SS. He was given his own battalion. And he and they sent him against the partisans in the occupied Soviet Union. They did not like the partisans. Partisans were a pain in the ass for the Nazis invading into Russia and invading England. The partisans actually really made a dent in the war effort. And they really were annoying, at least. And so supposedly tortured, raped, murdered civilians, including children, allegedly fed female hostages strychnine in order to entertain the soldiers while they died in agony. He was captured by the French in a hospital after being injured at the front. The French handed him over to the Polish, who locked him up and beat him and tortured him over the next few days. He died from his injuries inflicted by the Polish guard. So it was a good example of an eye for an eye, right? So you can kind of think of him as your sort of impulsive, psychopathic murderer. There he is, right? This guy, you're going to learn about him. You're going to see a movie of a guy portraying him. This is Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich was Himmler, Reichsfuhrer Himmler's main lieutenant. Second most powerful guy in the SS. Some people think maybe the most powerful, running things behind the scenes from Himmler, but probably not. But he was very beholden to Himmler. He is the guy who maybe you could think of him as sort of more of the multiple murderer psychopath with the brain, is able to do the planning. He is the guy who is one of the instigators of the final solution. You're going to see this in the movie later this semester when we watch Conspiracy. And so I won't say much more about him, but again, had some of those psychopathic characteristics, but also the ability to plan and use the frontal cortex to do things. And again, lots of examples. Here you have a guy who would have been one of the heads of the Einsatzgruppen, an officer planning these sort of pogroms and killing of Jews, and even getting, in this case, Lithuanians to do the killing for you. And we'll talk more about that later on, too. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to stop that there because we're going to get into a lot of this stuff later on. We can talk a little bit about the psychological and sociological explanations for the rise of modern warfare. We've talked a little bit about that already. And talk to you a little bit about weapons. And weapons is the idea of weapons being the intermediaries between aggressive human intelligence and its desires. Again, I mentioned that weapons, enable human beings to amplify their violence. And you can look at the evolution of weapons. And sorry, it's not a very good slide, but you can see here for most of human history, weapons included basically bladed things and sticks with something on the end of it. Right? It's only till really recently in history, starting around the 1400s, that we really started to have projectile weapons of real damage. Cannons, and then starting out with muskets, and then again these projectile weapons evolving very, very rapidly in a few hundred years to modern weapons and modern guns, and then even more rapidly with the introduction of planes, you start adding aircraft, and then in the modern era, missiles and drones, things like this. Now we can look at war-related deaths worldwide, and we can see that really human beings really didn't start killing each other in just humongous numbers until the modern era. Now, yes, there's also more human beings, so you got to take that into account as well. But really, the killing, for a lot of human history, like our primate ancestors, was relatively inefficient. It's only really recently, late 1800s, early 1900s, that killing becomes incredibly efficient. And of course, now killing is unbelievably efficient. That somebody can push a button somewhere, and a missile could be sent to a city and wipe out, millions of human beings, in an instant. And so it's something that we have to be a little concerned about. You guys remember last year, Kim Jong-un was threatening to send a missile over to the United States. We are one of the closer places. He has missiles that could reach us. Now, of course, apparently he has missiles that can reach all through the United States, so I guess we don't have to be singled out anymore. But this is still a worry, that people can do this, that we have the technology for this. And you have powers, and you have sort of, maybe somewhat rogue governments like North Korea that might do something really crazy. And so this is a concern, right? Become too efficient at killing. Now, one thing about killing, and you can think about this, this kind of makes common sense, is you think about range, distance from the target. Somebody right close up, we're going to fight, you know, hand to hand, you know, we're gonna try to kill each other. I really don't want to get in a fight with this guy. He's big and strong. You know, I really might lose. You know, it's really risky. Really risky, right? So, it will high resistance to killing at close range. Okay? Now, maybe it's a little better. I'm here and I got a knife. I can throw it at him. That's a little better. Over here, I got a spear. Well, that gives me some advantage now. You know, I can spear him. You know, I'm a little less like it. So, again, you see, as the range gets out farther, it becomes easier to kill. Now I got a pistol. I don't have to worry about him much at all. I can kill him over here. He can't get to me. You know, so it's easier, right? Mid-range rifle. He's in the back of the room. You know, that gives me, or he's across the field over here. He's on the other side of the field. I can sniper him, right? Makes it easier. So the longer range you get out, if you get over a really long range, you know, you're in a plane, you're dropping bombs on people. That becomes a little bit easier, okay? I sit in the desert, in the Mojave Desert, or the desert in New Mexico, and I'm piloting a drone that's flying around Iraq. You know, targeting, you know, trying to find some ISIS guys, you know, going around. I see them in the car, they're the ISIS guys. I'm sending the missile, boom, right? That becomes much easier. Okay, much easier. Okay, so again, distance to the target is related to resistance to killing. Now I'll add in here too, just something for you psych majors. Also, the longer, the further you are from the target, the less likely you are to have PTSD. Close range stuff, a lot of PTSD. You know, we battled out with bayonets, you know, I ended up killing him, but I go home, that was, you know, I had all sorts of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Even with, you know, gun range stuff, post-traumatic. We know a lot of our soldiers fighting have post-traumatic stress syndrome. The guys in the airplanes, the guys piloting the drones, they may have some post-traumatic stress, but not as much. Okay, so you know there's something going on there. I mentioned this already. It's human beings symbolizing things. We sublimate stuff. Freud talked about the idea of sublimation. We turn our aggressive energy into something else, something more constructive. For Freud, this is how civilizations develop. So something interesting to keep in the back of your mind. And Freud wrote a whole book on this called Civilizations and Its Discontents, highly worth reading. And I like this quote. I'll read it to you. Men are not gentle, friendly creatures wishing for love who simply defend themselves if they are attacked, but that a powerful measure of desire for aggression has to be reckoned with as part of their instinctual endowment. The result is that their neighbors to them not only a possible helper or sexual object, but also a temptation to them to gratify their aggressiveness on him, to exploit his capacity for work without recompense, to use him sexually without his consent, to seize his possessions, to humiliate him, to cause him pain, to torture, and to kill him. Homo homini lupus means man is wolf. Who has the courage to dispute it in the face of all the evidence in his own life and in history? And Freud wrote this after World War I. He was Austrian, so he was on the side of the Germans, and so spent a lot of time thinking about this. Now I won't go into Freud's idea of sublimation too much, but the idea that our energy is sublimated. We take our sexual aggressive energy, and we're able to sublimate that, not act out on it, and channel it into things that are more constructive. And Freud said if civilization requires such sacrifices, not only of sexuality, but also of the aggressive tendencies of mankind, we can better understand why it should be so hard for men to feel happy in it. So we can sublimate our tendencies and create these great civilizations, but since we never get to act out on our urges, we're always miserable all the time. So this is Freud's very dim view of human beings. And he had a very dim view of human beings. He was also dying of jaw cancer by this time. So again, you know, he was probably in a pretty bad mood. But this is a pretty dim view. You know, you can create these great cultural things, but you're going to be miserable in it because you never get to act out on your urges. So go figure. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is mass killing and genocide. You can see from this cartoon, here are some genocide. This is the Nazi perpetrated Holocaust. We have other ones, the Armenian Holocaust, which happened earlier, the rape of Nanking, what went on in Ukraine, Rwanda more recently, Bosnia, Darfur, still going on perhaps, Cambodia. So lots of genocide. That's a relatively big genocides. So what is the definition of genocide? When does violence become genocide as opposed to mass killing or war? What are the processes that make genocide possible? So we'll talk a little bit about these briefly. So here's a map. This is a map that represents the historical period from 1900 and 2005. So if you thought genocide is relatively rare, hopefully this map will convince you otherwise. You can see these big red things are the genocides in the 1900s. Here is the Nazi perpetrated Holocaust. And altogether 11 million-ish, 6 to 9 million Jews. As Reiner and I will talk about, there are some very unique aspects to the Nazi perpetrated Holocaust that you don't find in other Holocausts, and then there's some aspects that are pretty similar to other genocides. Okay. We'll talk about those later on. See some of the other ones here. Here, this is a big one, 20 million. That's the Soviet Union. Who perpetrated that Holocaust? Stalin. So Stalin lived a lot longer than Hitler. That's one way you can think about it. Stalin lived to what, 52, 53? So he lived a lot longer than Hitler. So he had a lot of time, and he was fairly, you might say, psychopathic, somewhat paranoid. He was somewhat of an equal opportunity murderer. He murdered Jews, but he also murdered all sorts of other people, including people from his own country, Georgia, where he came from. Georgia? I think it was Georgia, yeah. He was very paranoid, so he'd get paranoid about a group of people and have them taken off and killed. There's a very interesting movie about the last days of Stalin some people like it. My wife hates it. I thought it was, Reiner doesn't like it. I thought it was hilarious and very interesting. It's supposedly taken from actual historical things that he actually did, which is kind of crazy, all these people he had killed. It was a weird movie, but I liked it. I thought it was very interesting. What about this? China, 30 million. You guys know about this? Who do you think perpetrated that genocide? Chairman Mao. How do you think he killed 30 million people? That's a lot of bullets. How do you kill 30 million people? You don't have gas chambers. Camps. Starvation. Starvation is the cheap man's way to kill lots of people. Also Stalin, most of starvation, Mao, starvation. And again, when you start collectivizing agriculture, this is one of the things that happens. A lot of people will die from starvation. Okay? Collectivizing agriculture doesn't seem to work out pretty well, at least initially. Okay? In China, you hear all sorts of crazy stories and Cultural Revolution, things like this. I knew people who were involved in the Cultural Revolution and were victims of it. A lot of terrible things happened. I had a friend of mine who was a Chinese acupuncture doctor. He had been working in a hospital in China. And the Red Guard came in one day, took all the doctors, nurses out in the courtyard, lined them up against the wall, shot him, and went to him and said, "Comrade, you are now running the hospital." He was the janitor. What do? Give people shots. So they went around and gave all the sick people in the hospital, gave them shots. The doctors were all dead. Eventually he went on and he was able to train as a traditional Chinese doctor, a barefoot doctor, and then eventually get the hell out and come to this country. And I knew a bunch of people. I worked at an acupuncture college, and there's a number of people from that generation who were there who had all sorts of horrible stories about Maoist China. Japan. Talked a little about this. I showed you some of those pictures earlier. Japan's genocide was not in Japan. It was actually perpetrated against the Chinese, and to some degree some Koreans, and then some Russians. A few Russians, but mostly the Chinese. Okay? And you see all these other smaller ones here. Rwanda is more recent. Zaire, the Congo, probably more than that. I have a lecture on this in the World War I class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is the 1900s. This is right. So this is the post-1900 leftovers. Right. There was a bigger genocide that was happening in the 1800s in the Congo here.
That also explains what is not.
Yes. So that's a very good comment. So, oh look, you're probably all thinking like, oh look, we're in the USA. Look how great we are. You know, like Mexico even. Yeah, we're really good. Look how good we are. You know, we didn't kill anybody. We don't do those genocides. Everybody else in the world, they suck. You know, we're great. We're Americans. You know, USA, right? Well, why is we have nothing here? Because we already did our genocide by the 1900s, right? We had a slow motion genocide going from 1700s all the way up into ending in the 1900s. Maybe still going on if you're certain Native American groups. The slow motion genocide that killed vast numbers of Native Americans. Believe it or not, there were people living here before our ancestors got here. Most of you, unless you're Native American, you know you are the son or daughter of immigrants to this country. Okay, and we seem to have a lot of talk about immigrants now, and I'm not going to be political about this, but basically, unless you're Native American, you can either say you are a recent immigrant, or your families are recent immigrants, or you are later immigrants. And maybe there's some difference between, people who are, who immigrated here a long time ago, maybe people who immigrated more recently. To me, it seems like a pretty arbitrary distinction. I will say that as somebody who is the son of an immigrant. So, I might be a little biased about that. But we are a nation of immigrants, and we have largely, or at least our ancestors have largely killed off, the majority Native American population, and also abused and treated them very poorly. So we don't see anything here. And if you want to go to Mexico, you can go back into, the 1500s, 1600s, and you can see similar kinds of genocide against the natives there as well. And a lot of other, I would say also, you could probably include a lot of Latin America. So, this is really common, very, very common. Probably right now, somewhere in the world, some people are being killed in genocide. Here's a more detailed map. You want to read about this? Leave that for you. This is a map of the Armenian genocide of the Turkish genocide of Armenian people. I put this up here. My ancestors, my dad's side, they're Turkish. My ancestors live on this island here, about right yay there. Luckily for me, they were not involved in this genocide, even though they identified they are Turkish people. At this point in time, they were under British rule, right, Reiner? Because my dad was telling me they're under British rule. So they were British at this point. So they did not participate in this, but they are ethnically Turkish. They are aligned with the Turkish government. So there's probably some shared guilt to go along with this. And the Armenian genocide is something still that the Turkish people and the Turkish government has not fully come to grips with and acknowledged, apologized for, made reparations for. Armenian people are very bitter about this, and I think for good reason. There is a lot of Armenian Holocaust denial and a lot of Armenian Holocaust minimization. I have members of my own family who I would consider to be Armenian Holocaust minimizers. And I used to get in big arguments with them about it, and now it's really difficult for me to talk to them about it. I mean, the Armenian Holocaust is like the Nazi perpetrator of the Holocaust. The Armenian Holocaust of Armenian people is very well documented. To say that, like a lot of the minimizers do, to say, oh, these people were all working for the Russians or something was really, or it's just a war, everybody died in the war, is just, that, to me, that's BS. Okay? This went on. I think the Turkish people should probably acknowledge it and do something about it, maybe give back some territory to the Armenians. They took a lot of territory from Armenians around here. This is my thought. Okay? Again, also, lots of genocide kinds of things. In India, you have some, especially around the partition. When India got its independence and then partitioned into Pakistan and India, there's lots of killing, etc. I should mention Native Americans. And again, I'd like to reiterate this because, people, again, especially if you listen to some of the political debate about immigrants going on now, it seems to me a little crazy, but this was a nation of Native Americans. They lived here. All sorts of tribes. Here you go. You can look at see all the ones that lived here. This was a popular place. It wasn't empty. We just came over on the Mayflower and started just, oh, hey, look, this empty place. There were people living here. And there were people in California, by the way. Lots of genocide of Native Americans in California. In fact, up into the 1800s, late 1800s, there were even bounties put on Native Americans. You could ride in with your buddies and do a camp. Maybe you have Shumash Indians, take some scalps and go turn those in for $25 each. That went on for a long time. Especially when you talk about tribes like the Shumash, which were very, very non-aggressive. You really see the real criminality of this, in my opinion. All right, let's talk about a definition of genocide. And basically, we talk about any means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, that might be starvation, imposing measures intended to prevent births within this group, that could be sterilization. Dr. Bushman's going to talk to you about that later on in the semester. And forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And again, this is something the Nazis did. They took children who seemed to be Aryan looking and sent them off to Germany to be raised by a SS family. When does violence become a genocide as opposed to mass killing or war? Genocide is a form of one-sided mass killing in which a state or other authority intends to destroy a group as that group and membership in it are defined by the perpetrators. So it's the perpetrators who do the defining. The Nazis told people who were Jews and who weren't Jews. They decided. Okay? You might, maybe your family, converted, to Catholicism, 200 years ago, and you identified yourself as a Catholic. The Nazis come in and look at your genealogy and go, no, you're a Jew. Off to the concentration camp. The perpetrators define who's the member of the victim group. Genocide, in the generic sense, is the mass killing of substantial numbers of human beings when not in the course of military forces of an avowed enemy under conditions of essential defenselessness and helplessness of the victims. People killed in Holocausts, in genocide, are for the most part defenseless and helpless. Okay? They're not fighting back. It's not like they picked up guns and they're fighting back and resisting. Okay? That doesn't mean there isn't resistance. It doesn't mean people who are part of that victim group don't resist. And there was resistance in World War II, especially in the East, by these partisans. I think Ryan will talk. You can talk a little bit about that. Yeah, Ryan will talk a little bit about that. Great movie, Defiance, with Daniel Craig. You should watch that. But basically, to be a victim of a genocide is to be killed while being helpless and defenseless. Okay? And again, when you look at genocides around the world, this is essentially what's going on. Some kind of state or state-like entity, be it the Nazi regime or ISIS, is taking innocent people and doing these things to them. Put a picture of Stalin up there because he's sort of the poster boy for this sort of thing. Okay? What are the processes that make genocide possible? There's 8 stages that have been outlined by a guy named Dr. Greg Stanton, who works for the State Department. And these are classification, symbolization, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, the actual killing, and then denial. And so if we can understand these processes, perhaps we can come up with ways of sort of derailing something that is progressing toward a genocide. Classification, us versus them, distinguish people, again, by the perpetrators distinguishing people by nationality, ethnicity, race, or religion. And you can divide society up and you can foment a power struggle. Symbolization, languages, types of dress, uniforms, colors, religious symbols. Propaganda plays a major role in reinforcing this us versus them. So you're either an Aryan or you're a Jew. Right? Here's one of these charts showing, if you have Jewish ancestry. Propaganda piece, this is their Stormer, this is a Nazi newspaper. There's a Jewish passport, you guys have heard of this, wearing the Jewish star to identify you as a member of that victim group. It also gave Jewish women the name Sarah, and men got the name Israel. And they put that in your passport. Didn't matter whether that was your name or not, you got those names. Dehumanization. One group denies the humanity of another group, makes the victim group seem subhuman. This, again, as I mentioned before, overcomes the normal human revulsion against murder. And so here you have, this says something to the same effect of, this is a Nazi propaganda, something to the effect of, does the same soul dwell in these bodies? So here you have your Aryans here, and they're saying, look at these people, they outwardly look human beings, but they don't have a soul like we do. They're not really human. Okay? And this is the kind of dehumanization that makes it easier to eliminate people. Okay, and there's lots of dehumanization, hate propaganda, and speeches. Members of the victim group are often described as animals, vermins, described as diseases. This is very, very common in Hitler's speeches. A friend of mine did his dissertation on this. And you see it in other genocides as well. They talk about the Rwandan genocide, the anti-Tutsi messages, like calling them cockroaches and relating them to diseases. This is a very common thing you find in genocide. You also invoke the superiority of one group and the inferiority of the other. And you justify murder by using euphemisms, ethnic cleansing, purification, as we will see in the movie Conspiracy. We also can call it evacuation. Genocide is a group crime, and so it must be organized, so there has to be some sort of state entity that organizes provides arms, financial support, etc., etc., etc. And there's plans made in the perpetrator group for the sort of final solution. And then the extremists drive groups apart, more propaganda, hate groups, laws passed that forbid intermarriage. Again, you're isolating the victim group more and more and more. Political moderates are silenced, threatened, intimidated, and in some cases killed. Or you can just silence the political moderates through propaganda. This is something I don't think I'm taking really being political about this, but this is something that's really happened in the United States in the past few years. That political moderates, middle of the road politicians on either side, Republican, Democrat, really essentially been silenced now, and we don't have much of them anymore. Polarization, again, attacks are staged and blamed on targeted groups. You'll learn about the Reichstag fire, Kristallnacht, where lots of synagogues were burned. Members of victim groups forced to wear identifying symbols. Death lists are made. Victims, again, separated because of their religious or ethnic identity. Preparation, segregation into ghettos. This happened in the Nazi Holocaust. Victims forced into concentration camps. Victims are also deported to famine-struck regions for starvation. Or if you're the Turkish government, you just drive the Armenians out into the desert. So take your choice, famine or lack of water, dehydration, and kill them. Weapons for killing are stockpiled. This is if you're not going to starve people to death. And you can also put people into camps and do the killing in a very mechanistic, planned, organized, almost industrial way. This is one of the unique aspects of the Nazi perpetrated Holocaust. That it's sort of industrial nature, especially at least the second half of it. We'll talk a little bit about that. Extermination begins, do the mass killing. This is the actual genocide. You can also get other groups to help you. This happened in the case of the Nazi Holocaust. In places like Lithuania, you get the Lithuanian locals to do the killing for you. And then the last stage is denial. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about Holocaust denial in this class. As we've told you, we think Holocaust denial is a kind of a ill-informed racist fantasy. It is not true. The Holocaust certainly took place. The amount of evidence is overwhelming. Not just there, it's overwhelming. And again, you just have to go to one of the museums, go to the museum in DC, and you can see all the resources and everything that people have looked into this. And again, you can talk to eyewitnesses, and there are many. They're getting old now. Again, the Shoah Foundation at USC has recorded thousands of video testimony of these people, and that stuff is available online. So we can talk a little bit about denial and the characteristics of denial. It's always found in genocide both during and after. Okay? Continuing denial is among the surest indicators of further genocidal massacres. Okay? Continuing denial is something that can predict another genocide. Okay? If I had to predict who would commit another genocide, the Germans or the Japanese, I'd probably say the Japanese are more likely than the Germans. Now, hopefully, neither are going to do that, right? But again, the Japanese, I think, not fully coming to grips with it, sweeping it under the rug. Denial extends the crime of genocide to future generations of the victims, is a continuation of the intent to destroy the group. So denial is a way you can keep the fires flamed. Tactics of denial are very predictable. By the way, this was my professor, Deborah Lipstadt, who was at Emory University, and she was sued by this guy. This guy's name is David Irving. He is a historian, I'll put that into quotes, and he is at best Holocaust minimizer and at worst Holocaust denier, and he's written a number of books out there, and she said, you're full of crap, you're wrong about this stuff. He sued her in British court. She's an American, she didn't have to respond, but she decided to go to London and fight him in court, and had a court battle with him, and she wrote a book about this, and she won the case. And they just recently made a Hollywood movie about this. It's not so good, yeah. But the book is very interesting. She's a very interesting person. She was one of my teachers at the Holocaust Museum when I was on fellowship there. Very interesting person. And refuted David Irving's assertions about Holocaust minimization or denial, note for note. And again, another example of overwhelming evidence. If you read the book, the overwhelming evidence refuting the Holocaust denial here, very well documented. She's a good scholar and very well documented, historian, very well documented. So I encourage you to read this. By the way, this is something we see all the time. People go to the library, they're looking up stuff on this, and they end up, they don't know. You guys don't know. You're just looking up books. Here's a book written by David Irving. Don't quote from David Irving. If you see David Irving quotes in your book, we're likely to ding the paper because we do not consider him to be a legitimate source. Okay? So just be aware of that. And I think most everybody's here today, so hope you're hearing this. Don't quote David Irving. Don't use David Irving as a source. Okay? We don't want to support him academically anyway. Okay? Now, tactics of genocide are predictable. Here's a bunch of them. I won't go into all of these things. I'll just mention a couple. Destroy the evidence. Attack the motive of the truth teller. Point out atrocities committed by other people. Well, those Armenians, yeah, they died in the desert. But, some Turkish people died over there too, I've heard that, actually, personally. Yikes. Claim the deaths were inadvertent. Well, they were all diseased. They all died of smallpox. They were anti-vaxxers, so they went in the desert. They died of smallpox. No, they died of smallpox. They died of famine. Okay? Infantilize the strangers of the victims. Well, they're not really like us. Those Native Americans, they're really something else, right? It was a civil war. This is very common. Oh, it was a civil war. Those people were all fighting amongst themselves. That's what caused it. You can play games with language. Call them crimes against humanity instead of genocide. It's an ethnic cleansing, not genocide. A lot of these euphemistic names here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll see a lot of these kind of denials, and these are very predictable. You find them in most genocides afterward. Okay. Now I talked to you a little about groupthink, a little bit about why human beings tend to go along with the crowd. And I'm not going to go in a lot of detail about this, but again, you're more likely to get people going along with the crowd when you have high cohesion, group homogeneity, and low self-esteem of the group members. And we see some of these characteristics among the sort of ordinary men in the Nazis, doing the Nazi killing. And again, it leads to a bunch of other things. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. I might talk about this a little later. I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but you can read about this. And the other idea is unbounded rationality that goes along with this, and the idea that you can rationally plan for every contingency. A lot of human beings feel they can do this, but you really can't. And so again, when we see the movie Conspiracy and you see these people planning for the final solution, it sounds all very cut and dry and they plan for every contingency. And the reality of it is it's not quite that way, especially when you get to the end of the war and you realize that the contingencies have not been planned for. And they're closing down camps ahead of the Russian invasion, and they're putting people on forced marches, and the soldiers who are in charge of the concentration camp prisoners are marching are not giving out orders, and you have a lot of chaos and a lot more violence going on. So again, you'll see some of this stuff, especially at the end of the war. And again, we can kind of sum all this stuff up and say, well, genetic programming toward violence from our primate past, being creatures that exist in a dominance hierarchy. We could add into groupthink, our sort of willingness to go along with what the group does, our unbounded rationality, our inability to plan for all the contingencies, and then the idea that we are not good at sublimating things, and then maybe that leads to a violent ideology, which then in itself leads to a violent society. So that's just kind of a working algebraic model, if you will. Not to take it too seriously, but just to sort of summarize the ideas I'm trying to get at in this lecture. Okay? I think that's all I have for this. Any questions about anything?